Hello everyone, the Genshin 5.6 beta has recently started and Escoffier, the Fontaine chef girl, will be the one new 5-star Cryo character releasing in patch 5.6. Ever since the dominance of Freeze ended, the Cryo element in general has been really struggling in terms of meta viability for a long time, with most of the Cryo characters not being as strong as the other characters in the game. But with the release of Escoffier, finally after many years, Cryo is looking to get a much needed buff as Escoffier is looking to increase her damage as well as do some solid damage herself. To see exactly how good Escoffier is looking at the moment, let's discuss the details of her initial beta kit. As always, remember that this is very early information, so very subject to change. Escoffier is a 5-star Cryo polearm user who is Uxia aligned in a sense with crit rate. She is Genshin's first actual Cryo off-field sub DPS with a kit similar to units like Fischl, Chiori, and Emily. However, unlike these three off-field units who just apply their element and deal damage, Escoffier also provides healing and damage buffs to her team, with her buff increasing the more you meet her specific team building requirements. Escoffier's skill is the main source of her off-field capabilities. Pressing it does damage, generates 4 cryo particles, and spawns a cooking mech that follows the active character for 20 seconds. During this time, the mech will fire a cryo attack toward a nearby enemy every second. This attack technically has a very small AoE but is realistically single target oriented. Based on the ICD, the mech will apply cryo every other hit, meaning that Escoffier applies a similar level of off-field cryo application as Sitlolly, which is great. On top of that, the skill has a 15-second cooldown, so you can maintain full uptime on Escoffier's off-field damage. Lastly, you can actually hold the skill, which allows you to feed the mech ingredients to gain a random assortment of dishes with a 7-day timer, similar to the parametric transformer. Next, Escoffier's elemental burst is very straightforward. When used, she does AoE cryo damage and heals the entire party, scaling off her attack. At burst talent level 9, a 2500 attack Escoffier will heal the team for about 9500 HP, which is a pretty strong team heal. But on top of that, Escoffier's A1 passive makes her heal even more. After using her burst, Escoffier will give additional healing every second to the active character for a total of 9 seconds. Assuming she has 2500 attack again, each healing tick will heal the active character for about 3400 HP. With a total of 9 healing ticks, Escoffier can heal a total of about 31000 HP for the active character. Combine that with the team heal from her elemental burst and you have a strong cryo sub DPS that's also a strong healer. The last and arguably most important part of Escoffier's kit is the buff she provides in her A4 passive. Escoffier's attacks from both her elemental skill and burst will reduce both the hydro and cryo res of the enemies they hit for 12 seconds, and this hydro and cryo res increases based on the number of hydro and cryo characters on your team. Importantly, if you ensure that all of the party members are either hydro or cryo, you get a massive buff of 55% hydro and cryo res shred. This type of team building requirement passive is similar to Chevre's with their overload teams. However, there are some key differences that make Escoffier's passive less restrictive. First, Chevre's requires the team to only have pyro and electro characters in the party for her passive to work. Escoffier only counts the number of hydro and cryo teammates and will still give a small amount of red shred if other elemental party members are present. And second, while Chevre's red shred requires overload to be triggered, Escoffier's red shred is only dependent on your attacks hitting an enemy, so you aren't reliant on triggering a reaction like freeze, and the red shred will still work if your team is all cryo characters, for example. Escoffier is still heavily incentivized to have only hydro and cryo characters on the team for the max red shred, but at least she gives you a small buff if you don't completely meet the team building restriction. That's everything on the Escoffier's kit. Very simple in practice, just use your skill and burst, then swap out. With our main kit covered, let's discuss Escoffier's initial beta constellations. With C1, if your team has only hydro and cryo characters, Escoffier will give 60% cryo crit damage for 15 seconds after using her skill or burst. With C2, after Escoffier uses her skill, she basically gains 5 Shenhe-like quills that will increase the damage of her party's next 5 cryo attacks. C3 increases her skill talent level by 3, C4 gives 6 additional healing ticks for her A1 passive. In addition, during the time that Escoffier's A1 healing is active, there is a chance that the healing is doubled and it restores 2 energy for Escoffier, which scales off of her crit rate. C5 increases her burst talent level by 3, and lastly C6 allows Escoffier's mech to shoot 6 additional AoE cryo attacks when the active character hits enemies with their normal charged or plunging attacks. Based on the early constellations buffing only cryo damage, it is clear that although Escoffier provides hydro and cryo res shred, she's mainly focused on buffing cryo. In terms of early constellation strength, C1 is pretty good, while C2 is definitely not one of the massively strong C2s that other characters have. Next, let's go go over Escoffier's potential build options. Her signature is the best choice for her personal damage. Crit damage substat and the special passive gives her additional attack, as well as giving a 32% attack buff to the characters that she heals. For other 5-star weapons, Calamity Queller is also a very high damaging weapon option. Escoffier does have fairly significant ER requirements however, so weapons like Engulfing Lightning and Skyward Spine are also good options for the ER. For 4-star weapons, Deathmatch, the Battle Pass weapon, is her best 4-star option for maximizing her personal damage. In a good amount of teams however, Favonius Lance is Escoffier's best 4-star weapon because the extra energy is greatly needed to help reach hers and the team's ER requirements. Other weapon options you can consider are Mountain Bracing Bolt and the 5.4 Event Polearm. For artifact sets, 4-piece Golden Troop is Escoffier's best option because the majority of her damage, which is quite significant, comes from her elemental skill. For a more supportive artifact set, 4-piece Tenacity of the Millilith is also an option. For artifact main stats, she'll use attack or ER Hourglass, which depends on the weapon you choose and the team you put her in, attack or cryo damage goblet, typically favoring the attack goblet, and crit circlet. In terms of ER requirements, it heavily depends on how many cryo characters are on the team and how many Favonius users there are. I have some ranges listed here, but they are subject to change. Lastly, let's cover Escoffier's potential best teams. Since Escoffier's off-field cryo damage and elemental application is pretty good on its own, you can technically ignore her A4 passive team building requirements and just use Escoffier for her off-field cryo. For example, assuming the elemental auras work out, Escoffier can be a solid Emily alternative for Kenichi, where she can hold deep wood and utilize burning to melt her attacks, while also being able to remove burning at the end of the rotation so that 4-piece scroll is consistently active for Kenichi. This team is a big maybe however, as if the elemental applications don't work out well, the team falls apart. Escoffier can also be a decent choice for double Hydro Hu Tao as her healing is strong and she gives some Hydro Res Shred. Escoffier can also pair with Sitlali to buff a melt carry like Malwika. However, in many of these types of teams where you're not getting the max Res Shred from Escoffier, she's a decent usable option but not the best option, as other supports will generally be better. Where Escoffier really shines is in teams where there are only Hydro and Cryo characters, so that Escoffier can apply her 55% Hydro and Cryo Res Shred onto enemies. Since Escoffier is a strong healer, Farina is an amazing partner for her, as a lot of fanfare can be generated. Yalan is also a great support that complements the two. With the Hydro and Cryo Res Shred, all of these off-field sub DPSs will be dealing good damage, so you can kinda put any Hydro or Cryo character as the last party member and the team will work. Instead of Yalan, you can use a more buffing oriented support like Shenhe or Sitlali. Shenhe buffs Cryo since she gives her icy quills to each party member, so both Escoffier and the Cryo main DPS will have their damage buffed, and Sitlali buffs Hydro as she gives additional Hydro Res Shred when Frozen is triggered. With a team core of these 3 units, the last unit will typically be a Cryo or Hydro main DPS. In terms of Cryo DPSs, both Ganyu and Wriothesley Freeze teams will be buffed by Escoffier. These teams aren't looking to be that crazy, but Escoffier does make their Freeze teams much more comparable to their Melt teams. The Cryo carry that looks to gain the most from Escoffier on paper is Ayaka, where she can use Yalan or Shenhe as the final support alongside Escoffier and Farina. With additional sub DPS from Escoffier, these Ayaka teams are less reliant on solely her burst for damage. Based on early beta calcs done by Vomfi, her teams are actually reaching numbers among the current top tier DPSs, which is pleasantly surprising for a DPS from 2.0. However, these numbers are just from a sheet, and the big caveat for Ayaka especially is that much of her damage requires her entire burst to hit the enemy. But when you're in a scenario where the enemy can't be frozen, such as bosses, her burst may not be able to consistently land. So in practice, Ayaka may not perform to the theoretical levels that the sheet DPS suggests. Lastly, the main Hydro DPS looking to benefit from Escoffier is Neuvillette. Compared to his current best team where he's supported by Shilonen and Kazuha, the Escoffier version trades Neuvillette's personal damage for Escoffier's off-field damage. It loses grouping from Kazuha, but you also don't have to worry about a lower res shred duration from Viridian and Venerer. On paper, the Escoffier version of the team looks to be a strong alternative to the Shilonen Kazuha version. However, there are 2 big caveats. First, against single target bosses where freeze doesn't work, Neuvillette's Hydro application makes Cryo Resonance not active, so you lose 15% crit rate. And second, if your Neuvillette is more invested, like having his signature weapon in Constellations, you'll gain much more from buffing his damage versus spreading the team damage with Escoffier. Because of these 2 reasons, although Escoffier does work with Neuvillette, the current team with Shilonen and Kazuha will likely still be his best team. And that's everything on Escoffier as of now. Overall, her initial beta kit is quite strong. Escoffier is the modern version of Chiori and Emily's kit design, as not only does she deal good off-field damage, but she also provides team healing and a significant buff to both Hydro and Cryo DPSs with her res shred. Her significant 55% res shred does require that the team only has Hydro and Cryo teammates, a restriction similar to Chevreuse, but Escoffier does have the benefit of still giving a small amount of res shred if only part of the team building requirement is met. Escoffier does have the flaw of being very single target oriented, meaning that in AoE, her res shred may not be consistently applied for all the enemies, but all of her key strengths combined make Escoffier meta relevant and much more versatile than other supports that are considered niche. And for Cryo units and the Freeze archetype specifically, who have been struggling in the meta, Escoffier is exactly the buff that Cryo needs to be meta relevant again. On her release, however, I don't think Escoffier is looking to immediately stand out within the overall meta. The two DPSs whose teams have the most impressive damage numbers based on early calcs, Ayaka and Neuvillette, have pretty big caveats such as Ayaka's burst not hitting and Neuvillette preferring more buffs at higher investment that will likely make these teams not as impressive in practice. Escoffier's main value on her release will be bringing up the power level of Freeze teams by buffing their damage. Considering Freeze has greatly fallen off as an archetype, it's great to have Escoffier buff them to make them much more usable in the meta. In the future though, I do think Escoffier will have much more impact on the meta, especially when Skirk releases, as it is very likely that Skirk will synergize with Escoffier and make a very top meta team with only Hydro and Cryo units. Even though Escoffier is a strong unit currently, which I think other creators and videos have emphasized, I don't think her base kit will be nerfed, as Freeze teams and Cryo units kinda need Escoffier to be strong to catch up with the meta. But we'll just have to wait and see how Escoffier's kit changes throughout the remainder of her beta. I hope this initial overview and analysis on Escoffier's kit was helpful to you all. Big thanks to Vomfi for doing the early beta Escoffier calcs shown in this video. He's recently started streaming on Twitch, so drop him a follow if you're interested in his TC or his thoughts. I will continue to analyze any significant beta changes made to Escoffier, so if you want to keep track of the beta changes, I highly recommend subbing to the channel to keep up to date with the latest beta news with TC influence analysis. If you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment or like the video if you enjoyed. And with that, I hope you all have a wonderful day.